Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and self-publishing. And today we are delighted to have somebody from my homeland, Caroline McIntosh, who is an author and a writing coach. We are delighted to have you here, Caroline. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. How are you doing today?
I'm great.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well. Thanks, Roland. And thanks for joining us, Caroline. I know that you are a writer of romance, and you wanted to come on today to talk to us about incorporating love into your fiction. So and it's a great topic, because we have a lot of romance authors, of course, that listen to this, and so they probably have some idea of how to do that, although it always helps to hear other perspectives on it. But then there's lots of books that aren't romance that still have love stories, right? There could be a side romance plot or just in general, the concept of love and giving that sort of making that real on the page isn't necessarily that easy for every writer. So learning some of the techniques of how to do that properly, I think, will be really of real value to authors of any genre, really. So thanks for coming on to talk to us about that. Why don't you start us off by telling us a bit about yourself and your writing journey, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So I've been writing for at least 5 years. It's probably a little bit more than that. And some of it's been on and off. And I've done more romance more in the last few years, though. So I started off with some YA, and then I did a bit of fantasy. But the romance has come over the last few months. I've realized, I've sort of general put things together and realized what it is that I really do enjoy writing, and that is the romance.
What is it about romance that you love? Because I believe it or not, I write romance, and I love romance because at the end of the day, I think that's what gives life purpose and meaning, isn't it? You find someone who you love, and you give yourself to them, and they give themselves to you, and you make the world better together than you would do individually. So I think there's something wonderful and romantic about it.
That's exactly the same for me. I think too is the idea of sharing something. It's not necessarily so much with a partner, but it's just sharing even a smile or an act of kindness and that sort of thing. It's just, love is so important in the world, and we all tend to forget about that. We get caught up with the other stuff or the scary things. But I think that love's so important that it needs to be reflected, whether it's a steamy sex scene or not, doesn't really matter to me. I think it's just the idea of something good happening. And, like I said, a smile being spread, or just something, an act of kindness, or just a thought about somebody. That to me is love. And even though it may not be in the deeper sense of it all, but it's still important. And with a romance story, you can still incorporate that kind of thing, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction, because if you're writing romance, then the steamy love scenes are obviously a big part of those books, but that doesn't show sort of the real love connection. I mean, you can do that with somebody you have just met, right? And often romance books, that's how they start off. but the idea that you're sharing that connection with another person is what really shows the love aspect of it, the emotional aspect of love, as opposed to the physical aspect of love. And so those are the things you mentioned: a smile, a thought of the person, a light touch on their hand as you're walking through the mall, or whatever, whatever. Those kind of little things show that without, they do a good job of showing instead of telling, right?
That's one of the keys as well, in the writing. The emotions, get the emotions over as much as you can, and the smaller things, in a sense, before you, and letting it each grow, letting it develop.
Now, I have this stupid rule when I write. Well, it's not stupid. I think it's quite sensible. When I write romance novels, that you have to fall in love with your heroine. Like, I think that's one of the important, because I imagine, I grew up reading all my mother's romance books, and I think one of the wonderful things is the feeling when you're reading things from the heroine's perspective, just the feeling of this guy actually loving you and accepting you for exactly who you are. So do you have any rules yourself when you're writing a romance? Do you even have multiple rules about like things that you need to include and incorporate to make a romance book seem credible?
I think for me, it's the structure of romance. I do tend to feel, when you said about falling in love with your heroine, I think I do that anyway. So I don't feel that's a rule per se. But for me, it's the structure of the romance story. If that's not followed by how I believe a romance story should be, the 4-act structure, which I can talk about in a moment, if it doesn't happen, then I tend to feel I'm shortchanged, or that's not a proper romance. And some of the things certainly include, so at the beginning, they're going to fancy each other and really just get to know each other. And then this next bit is they get to know each other a little bit more, and the feelings are more intense. And then the third bit is when it starts to go a little bit drastic, and the doubt creeps in. So they start getting a little bit scared, and then they not regrets, but just more thinking about at the very beginning. You've probably indicated why they shouldn't fall in love, or their doubts, their own problems and issues around the topic. So then at the third point, or third section, that's when they start to think, oh no, I don't like this. And they start to, although they did enjoy the first bit of their relationship, they're now starting to rethink things and think, oh no, I don't like this. And then generally speaking, something really awful happens and they split up. And then the fourth section, they don't, one of them is likely to turn around and say, no, I don't want to be with this person. And the regret or the disappointment and fear really gets bigger. Now, for me, what I would like to see is a meet cute, because they're always fun. That's when they first meet. And then the midpoint, if a book's written really well, I sometimes find it hard to know where each section is and begins. But the grand gestures I absolutely adore. And happy endings. For me, romance means a happy ending. And I could probably debate that for quite a while. But that to me is really important. If it doesn't have a happy ending, it's not romance. And then that's where I do get disappointed if people don't include that.
Yeah, I think that's a non-negotiable, isn't it?
I think most romance readers want that. That's why so many romance authors, write at the bottom of their blurb, this has an HEA, a happily ever after. But then that makes me curious then, because in the 4-act structure that you just went through, your final act, you said that the fear gets bigger, but you didn't talk about them eventually overcoming that fear and getting back together.
Yes, yeah. One of them stops and realizes, oh, hang on a moment, and they do want to be with that other person, and that's where the forgiveness comes into it.
Okay, yeah. So that's that final act.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, have you followed any like official structures to them? Because everything, I mean, I think a romance book to me, it's almost like poetry. It's like it has beats and it has all those elements. Yeah, it's like the hero and heroine meet in the first chapter and they have their meet cute. And at first they think they've not got to work together, and then they get attracted to each other, and then they fall for each other, and then they have the soft breakup, and then they get back together and they have the hard breakup, and then there's a forced separation, and then there's a happily ever after. And it's like a piece of music. And it's like if you're listening to a piece of music and they play the wrong note, or if it's in the wrong key, it is really jarring. And I feel that's the same for romance novels. And I love it. I love the fact that it's like writing long form poetry. But are there any particular beat sheets or anything like that you've studied? Because I follow Romancing the Beats, which I think you're probably familiar with. But yes,
Gwen Hayes. I was just going to say the same one. Yes, I think she's wonderful. Yeah,
that's absolutely, and it's beautiful. I mean, she lays it all out. But then once you see it, I think to a certain extent, when you start writing any story, you kind of think you're writing what happens to the characters, and you don't necessarily give much thought to a story. but actually you realize as you study more and more and study storytelling that it's all stories are kind of circular and they have these beats. And yeah, and romance I think is just beautiful because it has these particular beats that are repetitive. They're a formula, but in the same way that like a haiku or a sonnet or something is a formula, and you have complete freedom to do these things, but the freedom of a tightly defined brief, so to speak.
Yes, the creativity is there within that structure. That's what I like about it so much, because I could sit down and look at the happy ever after. Okay, how is it going to end? I might say to myself, and it doesn't feel restricted. It feels creative for me, even though there is that structure. People might say, oh well, that's too restricted, but to me it's not, because I can be as creative as I want in that part. I think that's very exciting. Yeah.
Now, in terms of you writing, being a writing coach for other people, when you're sort of coaching people to write romance, what are the first things that you sort of outline to them and want to explain and make them understand?
Well, again, I know it's starting at the end, but a happy ending, that is very important. Yeah. But also I would probably ask them for about 6 to 10 words of a sentence of what their story is about. What is your story about? And in 6 to 10 words, or a sort of, for example, an electrician plus a teacher equal love ignite, or, how does it end kind of thing. Just a very short formula or a sentence of what's your story about right now. And just so I can get a summary and a sense of what they're seeing. That would be the very start of it, and that wouldn't even be that's without all the ins and outs of the characters and intricacies and where they're going with the settings or scenes. It would just be the overall, where do you see this story.
So when you started writing, you said you'd been writing for 5 years. Had you studied the art of storytelling and the beats of romance before you started writing?
No. It took me quite a few years to cotton on that there was a better structure than what I've done in the past. Probably shouldn't admit that now, but
oh, yeah, I know. No. I'm the same way. Like I wrote 11 full-length novels before I wrote one that was really good and became like a popular seller, and that's literally because I thought, oh, a romance story, that's easy enough to write. And I did a few, and I think Craig and I first met online around that time, and I think Craig was just like, maybe these stories, you've got to have certain elements to them to make them successful. And I should have listened to them at the time, but I did eventually listen to them and became successful. But it's interesting. I mean, so over the course of the books you've written, have you seen an evolution of your own style and an improvement in your own books?
Yes. And I'm still doing that in a sense. Yeah. I would say definitely.
So I think we all,
I think that's okay to not have studied the genre necessarily. I mean, you've got to be somewhat familiar about it, but sometimes that can lead to you giving sort of something fresh to the audience. Because I remember that's kind of how I started as well. Like I hadn't really read any romance novels when I started writing it, and I remember some of the reviews I got were like, oh, this is like no other romance I've ever read before. That's when I realized I need to read some romance and figure out what it is that mine was missing. They weren't necessarily negative comments, but that's one person's perspective, whereas everyone else might be like, well, this isn't quite what I was expecting, in a more negative way, right? So you do want to sort of figure out exactly what it is that the genre is expecting, so that you can sort of meet those needs as well as tell your own story. So that, I mean, like you said, there's definitely still creativity involved, even though you are sort of following a structure. I mean, it's the same with when we talk about looking at covers, right? You can do a beautiful cover, but if it's wrong for your genre, that doesn't, it's not going to draw people in. People have an expectation and they see a cover that meets that needs, and that sort of implicitly tells them that the author understands what they're looking for and draws them in, even though we all say, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and people do, right? So I think that's very similar to what we're talking about here, in the sense that, you can have your creativity and do all that stuff, but still meet the needs of the readers. So, what sort of so how would somebody who isn't writing romance sort of want to incorporate that idea of love when it's not, the main purpose of the story. So it's not something they are going to, really concentrate on in terms of putting, like a lot of exposition around it, because maybe it's a science fiction novel or maybe it's a thriller, but they still want to have a love story that still resonates with people and doesn't just seem flat and added just for the sake of having a love story.
I would suggest to slow things down in each scene, no matter what the story plot is. Check your plot anyway. And personally, I would say make sure you've got a plot outline of some kind, so you know what your focus is and what's going to be happening. But I would say slow it down, slow the whole writing down, and see, especially if you're trying to look for ways to incorporate some love. Again, it's the touching, or it's the gentle looks, and it's the kindness. It's those sort of things that might even surprise somebody. But slow your writing down. Put as much emotion in it as possible. But that said, balance it with, especially if you've got a thriller, if you're getting too romantic in a sense, it may not work so well with a thriller aspect, because the thriller to me is a slightly different emotion that you're looking at there. The focus of the thriller is a different emotion that you're wanting to get your reader to think of. But you've got to put enough in there in the story to make people, your reader, think, oh, there's something happening here.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I mean, I always think you could take pretty much any action movie and rewrite it as a romance novel. You could take Raiders of the Lost Ark and focus on Marion and Indy, and they have that as a background. But you're right. It's like when you're in a life-death situation, maybe the romance isn't the thing you should be focusing on.
Well, let's not forget that in even with the outline of the romance, in Gwen Hayes's book, she comments about reflection. So you do need some reflection time, not the entire time. And I'm not saying it all has to be all action in a thriller or the other genres. But if you've got something's just happened, and for example, like you said, the stones come out and you're running away, and maybe you're going to grab your partner or the other person's hand and then run off that, together, make sure they're safe. But then you've got to get that reflection time so that you can think, what just happened? How did it affect me? And how is he or she affected as well? I think that's a balance as well of the to incorporate, but you're trying to put in the love there. But you don't want to focus on it so much, but at the same time, you do need some emotions in it to be able to, and the reflection part, because if everything is just boom, 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 it's too much I find it's too much for a reader. And there's so much there that you're missing the point of the actual essence of a story. The story does have reflection times. That's part of the growth of any character.
I think that's one of the nice things about romance specifically as a genre, is that it does have a lot of introspection, which, if you're writing a pure action adventure novel, it doesn't necessarily have that. But it's also, I was going to ask about, when you write, do you have any particular preference for the style of writing? Third person, first person? Do you write alternating points of view and stuff like that? Because I find those are all wonderful things that you can play with when writing a romance novel. You don't often have the opportunity to do. If you're writing a classic thriller aimed at a male audience, normally it's third person perspective. Whereas I love the fact that romance novels can be third person perspective, or they can be first person perspective, or they can be first person perspective from alternating viewpoints, where it's great because you get into the headspace of these two characters who are in love, and they each have different experiences, and often their experiences and perceptions are what causes the thing that stops them being together. And it's very satisfying when they both overcome that and then find their happily ever after. That's
right. Yeah. For me, the series I'm writing at the moment is from the third person point of view. But I have written stories before that for the first person, but it wasn't a love story.
And what made you choose to write in third person?
I think it was something different at the time. I thought, I haven't done this and I'd like to try it. So, yeah.
And is that the style you like? Is that the style you feel more comfortable in writing?
Yes, but I do like to read the other ones as well, because you do get some fun. especially if it's first person and then the other one is a first person, and you're not comparing, you're just, as you said, you're seeing the same situation from two different viewpoints. And I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think that's one of the troubles with when you're writing the other genres and you're usually seeing it through the main protagonist's eyes, right? So if you're, think of it like a Jack Reacher book or something like that, where they're running through, shooting up the bad guys and doing whatever, and then there's this love story, and all you can see often is sort of their perspective of the relationship, and you don't necessarily get into the head of the secondary character, the person that they're having the relationship with. So are there ways to are there some good techniques to show, the relationship from the other person's perspective when you're not really in their head, aside from, maybe them doing those things like we mentioned, touching or whatever? You can't really show that they're considering their feelings in their head necessarily, although through actions, you can. But I think that's one of the main things. That's really the only technique you have, is through what they do in the book, right?
Well, dialogue. You've got the dialogue as well to see what they say, and then you can, as with dialogue, you can have the words in the quote, and then the sort of the action afterwards, in a sense. I'm trying to think of an example. Can't. But if you slowed it down and you have the other person thinking or saying, watch out for that alligator, and then you can describe what the person is doing.
Right. If they push the other person out of the way and and put themselves in the path of danger, that often shows that they're thinking more about that other person, right?
Precisely. The show don't tell bit.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really important, I think, with that. I mean, it's easy enough to just have somebody declaring their love for the person, but if they don't act as if they love them, then it falls flat.
Yes. Yes.
So when you said that you had started with YA and some other genres, so were you writing romance in those too, or were they strictly, other?
No.
But you found that you wanted to write romance even though you weren't writing it in those other ones? You just did you just jump into romance then without,
I love reading. I loved reading romance stories. And I don't know quite what it was, but there was something about it that I don't think I thought, oh, I can do this too. I just thought, wow, these are really great. I like this. And going back to the love idea, in a sense, sort of, if I enjoy reading them so much, what would happen if I wrote one as well? So I then decided I might maybe more than one, because a series, I understood that a series was important. So I thought I'll write a series. And so I think I just sort of took it from there.
That's it. Who are some of your favorite writers? You might even be familiar with. Americans have never heard of her. I grew up reading all my mother's romance books, but I particularly liked, and I guess this is more chick lit than romance, but Jilly Cooper and Fiona Walker. And Fiona Walker was just wonderful. She had these wonderful love stories that were set in this fictional village that she had. And you had characters who returned in book after book, and they're all focused on a different thing. So who are the authors who've really inspired you and wanted you to pick up a pen and start writing?
Quite a few. Megan Quick, Claire Kingsley, Camilla Isley. There's a Julie Horton. Jilly Cooper I haven't read, and Fiona, I think I might have read one of hers, but it was quite a while ago. But the Fiona Walker, I haven't. I'm going to add her to a list. I'm going to look her up. Yeah.
I really enjoyed her. Claire Kingsley is wonderful, and she's so prolific as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and what did you take away from authors like Claire Kingsley?
Oh, so much. Again, slow it down. think I learned, in a sense, that romance is wonderful, but it doesn't have to be just a love story, because with them, with Claire Kingsley especially, she seems to have a deeper plot going through, or a different thing happening there as well. So there is the love story, but there's also sometimes there's there's a danger aspect, or there's something that hasn't worked out for the characters. And I think I learned that it doesn't have to be, like, for me at the moment, my stories really are more romance oriented.
Yeah.
But for Claire Kingsley, I found that I can't remember which one it was. Not Cooper Bailey, but there was one of them in her series that somebody had a stalker. So you've got that aspect of things as well. And I realize that now, that I could write a story in that sense with the romance going on, but also with the darker side of things, of human nature happening as well.
Yes, Claire Kingsley is quite interesting that way, because she's got quite an eclectic range of books. She has like the real cute, lovesy, small town romance, Hallmark movie type stuff, and then she has things that are a little edgier and a little darker. And there aren't many writers who like run the gamut the same way she does. Sorry, Craig, I cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about sort of the techniques of building that love relationship over time, right? Because I mean, there's different ways, different sort of types of romance. There's the love at first sight, or where it starts off hot and heavy, or they meet at a bar and then have a one night stand and then get back. But sometimes it's more of the person, and this would be in non-romance stuff probably more likely, where they meet somebody and they're sort of like a colleague or a friend, or for whatever reason they're in their lives, but over time, over the novel, that love builds, right? So instead of like we've talked about the idea of showing the love, through the touches and the whatevers, right? But that's once that love has sort of come about, right? But what are some ways that we build towards it and show them falling in love at the beginning?
That's a good question. I would think the things, like, let's say, for example, a brother's older brother's friend, and the sisters falls in love with the friend. So some ways to the memories, you'll have memories, which again, sort of look at the reflection parts. You'll have, again, you can still have, because now they're probably about 5 or 10 years on from when they first met each other, or their relationship as children. So you've probably got some years in there as to what they were doing in between. And those can be quite key components and scenes, because you're going to have people sort of stopping and thinking, okay, do I really like him? Do I not? What did he do at the very beginning? Or maybe the guy's always been very supportive and the family themselves haven't. So you can have moments where the brother, or the brother's friend, has always been very okay, and she's like, the girl looks back and says, yes, I remember X, Y, and Z happening, and this to me, this was really important. And I really enjoyed it when maybe they went to the movie theater together, or maybe you look back on the memories and think about the really important ones and how they affected things, and then also compare to right now and what's happening right now and how they're meeting, and the new stages. And then still you've got the development of that story, because you want to be sure that no matter what's happening right now, they still want to, what's the ending going to be like? Is the couple going to be together? And then how is the family going to be appreciating that or not appreciating it? How are they going to come round to the idea that they are together?
Yeah, I think adding obstacles, right, is one of those techniques that is really effective for building those relationships. It's putting an obstacle in the path of that relationship and then showing how motivated they are to get around it and what they do to get around it. Do they work together to get around it?
Absolutely. And I think some of those obstacles can be the family's opinions.
Yeah,
Or the big brother's thoughts, no, you're not going to be with her. No, I don't like that idea at all. That sort of stuff. But yes, the emotional obstacles, because that person is probably sitting there thinking, well, I don't know if I should be with this. This feels a bit odd, but I do like him.
Now that I like that. I was just thinking that actually features in some of your books, doesn't it? Like you in A Returning Love, for example, there's the whole thing of your character Abigail is trying to choose between these two men, and her father, and one of the men's father is very adamant about how things should be, and then her son is very adamant about how things should be. And it's interesting to see how these external factors are influencing which route she goes down.
Yes. Well, you've got to consider, it's for a bit of a spoiler here, but yes, the other thing around that is that the guy there has actually come out of a book, and that's part of the magic with my romance series. So he can't stick around forever anyway. So he's come out of a book due to the chair. There's a magical chair in the village, and the chair created this character to come out of the book. So he and Abigail can't be together. They just can't. The old man knows this. The father of the other man knows that. So he knows that it's not going to happen. So Abigail has to cotton on to that one.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. I'm reading my daughter a series of books called The Book Wanderers, and the whole twist of that is the protagonist, who's this 12-year-old girl. Her father is a fictional character, and it's kind of like that's very interesting when you think of that and all the ethics. Those three books, they have very distinctive covers that are very much in keeping with a certain genre of romance. I mean, the illustrated covers are very, very popular with a certain audience in romance. What made you particularly pick that route?
For my covers?
Yes.
It was it was a bit of a it sounds odd. I struggled, to be honest, at the very beginning with my covers. The Sparkling Love was, I wanted something with a rocking chair, because the rocking chair really is important in the village and in the stories. I wanted something that, I love the idea, at the top there's an A, and it looks like a portal, because you'll have a couple, one person on one side and the other one on the other side. And in a sense, that's exactly what is happening. It is a portal, because that chair brings the people either in or out of the village, or into a story in the chair. So that was very important. And it also is, some of the next stories in the series don't have that as much, but they do have that portal still important, because the chair is it's very magical. What made me decide to go with those covers? The essence of the portal, the essence of the chair, and the essence of, I liked the font of them and the colors. I thought that if it was too busy, I didn't like busy, but I didn't like that. I needed a hint of magic, which I felt was in there. And I needed a hint of the romance. Obviously, I needed that in there as well. Does that help?
That does. No, I think covers are very important. I always say covers are almost like the dress code for a book. It's like, James Bond goes to the ambassador's reception in a tuxedo because everyone else is in a tuxedo, and he'd look out of place there. And it's the same when your books are among other books on the digital bookshelves. It's like their cover has to look the same as the others. Otherwise, people don't take it seriously. So I think you've got very congruent covers with a particular niche. And so I was just interested to see where. Now, do you design those yourselves? You went to a designer?
I went through a designer, but I asked a lot of questions, and I said a lot of things. They gave me some from the very beginning that I looked at and thought, no, that's not right. And I kept going back to them, and no, that's not right. So I did use a designer, but in a sense, I had a lot of help. And now when I contact them and say I need a new cover, that it goes very well.
And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what would you, when you talk and coach other authors about, the not the things to do with writing, but do you coach them just writing, or do you ever coach them about, how to package their book together?
Writing is the primary thing. If they ask me more questions, I'm happy to answer those. What were you going to ask me?
Well, no, just about covers. It's like when you talked to, is that something that you ever consider and give advice about?
It would be if I needed to. I think I might. At this point, I haven't faced that, so I don't know.
Do you go through their books and sort of give them pointers on, if they come to you at the stage where they've already written some or all of the book? And is that something that you typically see where they have some kind of love story in there that you can tell isn't really working, it falls flat, and you need to sort of help them work on that?
Yes. The beta reading and story outline services is what I offer.
Right.
So yes, the beta reading. Sorry.
No, yeah, I was going to say, just from that perspective, you're kind of like the love doctor, right? So you'll beta read their book and then sort of give them that feedback. Is that something that people have, that authors have a lot of trouble with? Do you find is that emotional love aspect in their stories?
The ones I've read have been very fast paced and haven't stopped to think about the love story itself. They've been more boom, 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 this happens, boom, boom, boom. And I've lost myself in a sense, or lost the story of what they're trying to say, or what point did they kiss, or what point I've lost those elements. So the ones I've seen have been very just almost just, I want this scene in there. I want that scene. I want that. I want that. Whereas to me, a love story romance is, what's the purpose of the scene? It's not just let's have that in there. It's let's get down to the purpose of the scene. Why is that scene here? It's got to make sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to me, then we need to rethink.
Right. It should always move the story forward, not just be fluff.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So do you find that people that are writing other genres have more trouble with adding the love scenes, or are you finding that even romance writers, it doesn't always work?
Okay, so I can't answer that because I really just focus on romance.
Okay, but then you are seeing that even romance writers are not really getting the love part, correct?
Yeah. I think people just rush so much that they forget to slow it down. And I think that's the other thing with some of the authors I do like. They manage to slow things down. They could take a long time, lots of words, like 1,000 or something words. If you think about it, one chapter can be just created a scene in one place. It doesn't mean that you have to go from, out of the door and across the park and over there and into the shop. You can slow it all down and just have so much. The essence is the emotion. What are they feeling again? What really is happening? And at the end of that scene, what do I really want to have happen at the end of that scene?
Yeah,
sometimes
I think that. Sorry,
it seems to be missed.
Yeah, well, I wonder if it's when you write a romance, it's not generally it's not just a romance. There's other things going on in the book, and so maybe those authors are paying too much attention to those other things and forgetting to develop the romance. They feel like they can just put the people together and then it's romance, but they need to be like, okay, yes, there is a plot and there is a reason why this book exists other than the love story, but you have to focus on that love story first.
Yes.
So we are, unfortunately, like a psychiatrist, approaching the top of the hour. But as we wrap things up, I was thinking, if there are any people listening to this who are interested in writing a romance, maybe don't know where to get started, can you give a hot list of like your top 3 tips of things they should do before they put pen to paper?
Sure. Okay, so I would say for number 1, think about that statement. What is the story going to be about? And make it 5 to 10 words, and just simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be anything. It just has to be very simple. It's going to be X plus this, and that equals that. Then I would probably say, okay, and what problems do they occur, and list about 3 to 5 problems. Just a start, 3 to 5. And then the third one, I would suggest emotions. Keep the emotions, and remember the emotions are really important.
Oh, I like that one. Keep the so right, we're going to wrap up in a second, and I want to ask you, Caroline, where everyone can find your work. But before we do, Craig, do you have any final questions?
No final questions. Just, I want to thank Caroline for coming on and talking to us about this, because it's really important. I was thinking, about how important it was for non-romance writers to ensure that they are getting the romance right. But it seems like even among romance writers, there's things that they have to concentrate on and really focus on as well. You think that if you're writing romance, you probably get it right no matter what, because you're writing romance. But it sounds like there's still some things that romance writers need to focus on to make sure that the emotion is there, and that the relationship feels real and not flat. So thanks for coming on and going through some of that with us.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Oh,
now I was going to say, where can people find your books and find out all about you?
You can find out more at my website, www.carolinemcintoshbooks.
Wonderful.
CAROLINEMCINTOSH books.com.
That is wonderful. Well, we will put a link down below in the description of this video. So if people have found value in what you've very kindly come to share with us today, they can scroll down there and click through to your website. And you know what? If you're listening to this, while you're there is that big comment section. Why don't you leave Caroline a nice message and tell her how much you appreciated everything she's taken the time to share with us today. And there is also that subscribe button if you haven't hit it already. There is a bell icon, which will give you an alert every time there's a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there is the like button. Don't be shy about giving that a tap. But thank you very much, Caroline, for joining us. We really, really appreciate you taking the time and everything you shared with us. And we'll be back next week with another episode of Fully Booked. So until then, cheerio.